welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. You know, the entrepreneurial journey is a really interesting journey. And I say that from the standpoint of a lot of people find themselves in jobs that they kind of fell into in some sense. And if they stay with it long enough, at some point in time, they've actually carved out a little handcuff for themselves where the money is actually generating some pretty good lifestyle. But what's missing is fulfillment. Yeah, I may be successful in a traditional way, but I'm not certainly feeling fulfilled in a way that actually is uplifting. So that being said, my guest today, Donovan Ryckis, has got a story about his entrepreneurial journey here, but I want to bundle it in the context of something that I think is really important to just about every listener. And that has to do with the nature of our healthcare and how we pay for it, how we consume it, how we have access to it, all of those sorts of things. And what's the implication of that in terms of our health and well-being, the viability of the soul that we have that is generating the life that we desire to live, that dream that we desire to live into and from. So that's an abstraction, but that's essentially what I want to kind of play with a little bit here. So Donovan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Blaine. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Exactly. You're the CEO and founder of a company called Ethos Benefits. You founded it with your wife, Chelsea. And what I'm fascinated by, I first came in contact with you at an office hours conversation that we were doing. And I said, I've got to have you on my show because office hours is 10 minutes. I've got a much larger format here because I wanted to go into some detail. You've pioneered a really interesting approach that effectively eliminates fraud, waste, and abuse from employer healthcare plans.
Yeah.
And those are notoriously quirky in a lot of ways. But that's not where you got your start.
No.
And so I'm interested here, and we'll talk about the healthcare side of it, but I'm interested in from where you started, how did you end up, and what was the catalyst for ending up founding Ethos?
Yeah. Certainly a journey, and only looking at it like retrospectively do I realize I made some pretty smart decisions along the way. But while you're going through it, you kind of just feel like you're fumbling, and you might also feel like the things you were doing prior, like you weren't being successful in them. And it's kind of because internally your body and your mind is saying no, this isn't it, right? This is not the path. This is not what excites me. This is not what motivates me, makes me feel fulfilled. So I started in financial services in my early 20s, which is a great career. And I immediately realized it was the industry for me, but that's a wide definition of things you can do. So the company I started with was doing life insurance and Medicare supplements, right? So what I loved about it was, you're essentially creating your own business. And what I realized was that in the sector, I could work with any persona, any my ideal ICP, my ideal client persona. I could kind of create them, find them, and work with them in a different area, not necessarily Medicare, because what I realized is I'm young 20s and I'm going to somebody that's turning 65 and telling them what to do. It just was not right for me. But logically, I'm looking at it and I'm like, wow, there's great earning potential. It pays great residuals. It's a legit business. But that wasn't it for me. So I kind of, I watched other people in my office be successful at it. And I was kind of trying to force myself to do the same and just realizing this isn't it for me. But there's a lot of cool things going on around me. And I kind of just started to level up my education, my licenses, my credentials, my designations along that path. And what I thought was the peak of it was getting my securities license, right? Mm-hmm. So now I'm a financial advisor and I decide, my ideal persona would be a business owner, somebody who is, an entrepreneur who's kind of engaging and has a large business and ideas and they're leading their industry and they have lots of opportunities, and I can have a more complex enterprise sale to where my consulting is making the difference and not a product,
Yeah.
right? Anybody can sell a product. I wanted to have my own kind of, intellectual property that I'm creating that's making the difference in their business, not some nonsense I'm selling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd kind of gotten myself up to that. So now I'm a financial advisor, and I had chosen to go the path of a Series 65, which is a fiduciary designation, which was a great way for me to kind of start that conversation. Because the funny thing is like I'm a fiercely independent thinker, and I don't like to do things if I don't think they're going to benefit or have the outcome for the end user that it should, right? So, I go from insurance to my securities license. What a normal person would do is they would try to go get a job at a big brokerage,
Yep.
right? Like that. And like they'll give you prospecting systems, and then at least you could trade off their name and you could say, hey, I'm with, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, Edward Jones, Raymond James, right? And at least get some appointments from that since you have no experience. I did not do that. Because again, being fiercely independent and thinking about the end user, each one of those companies is going to have products that they need you to sell, right?
Yep.
The job is really go find customers that you can sell this to, not go find customers and help them with whatever they need.
Big distinction.
Yeah. Seems small, seems slight. And sometimes you really have to explain it to your prospects and your customers of the difference, but it's huge.
Yeah.
And, that's what set me on the path of being a fiduciary financial advisor, was being able, back then when I started, 15 years ago, very few people even knew what fiduciary meant, right? That seemed like more like a obscure banking and financial term. That was kind of like, there was no commercials on TV talking about fiduciary financial advisors 15
Nope.
years ago.
Yeah.
And almost every financial advisor was a commission-based Series 6, Series 7, right?
Right.
So since I didn't have a big name to trade off of, I was like, here's how I'm going to represent myself. I am going to educate these people and explain the difference that I'm not commission based. I am working for you and we're going to go get the best outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Because the problem with commissions sometimes is they're not disclosed, and there might be more commission for this product than that one. And then you have to hope that person has, the
Enough
integrity
integrity.
to pick the one that's best for you. And you know what I mean? But it gets real murky. And if you can't see the line, if there is one at all, it's going to move.
Yeah.
Right. So the other thing I realized with those kind of commission based is what they do is, they do what they're compensated for, and they get to that point rather quickly. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if the commission is based on selling a product and I'm working with business owners, I knew they would leave a lot of holes and opportunities because their end goal was just to get to the money, get the AUM commission, right? Get the assets under management, get the commission from that, move on. So with business owners, and being a fiduciary, I would come in and explain a lot of concepts. So I would kind of pull together their accountant and attorney and make sure they were okay on a bunch of stuff that was neglected. So like one of my first clients, I brought together their accountant and I brought in an attorney, and we did things like irrevocable life insurance trust, revocable trust. Because what I showed him was like, hey, you have about 20 million net worth, but half of that is going to be taxed because of the way you structured it, right? So huge value that I'm not getting paid for, technically, right? And that was the spirit of the whole thing. Like, here I am taking a client from somebody that's been in the business for 20 years working with Merrill Lynch, but she left him for half of his assets to be taxed. His life insurance was going to be taxed. I got an in-force illustration on his life insurance. It was set to collapse in 7 years, but she didn't care because she didn't get paid to sell life insurance, right?
Yeah.
So like just flipping that showed these people all kinds of opportunities that were getting missed because I was no longer, focused on just getting that commission.
What's interesting about this, there's a couple of points, and I was making some notes here as you were talking. Moving away from, the pure securities, sales component here, where I've got a product to sell.
Yeah.
And it's a limited product inventory, and there's usually a focus on, let's do this one this quarter,
Yep.
whatever that may be. As opposed to, and this is kind of what I'm hearing is kind of a catalyst for you, is I wasn't making a difference and I wanted to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And that, for me, kind of moved into listening for how you position this relative to what I think the purpose of business is, which is to uplift the experience of being alive on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to consume something that somebody's selling me, but it's, just because I have to, check a box for regulatory reasons or whatever. But if what I'm doing here isn't uplifting the experience in the buyer, in this case, I'm not having the impact I'd like to have. And then I was also struck here with just the way you described, restructuring that particular client's portfolio and without compensation up front
Yeah.
on it. Now, there's probably something on the backside just in terms of client life and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, in the language I use on that is you positioned yourself as a center of distribution, not as a center of accumulation. And
Yes.
centers of distribution speak into the natural state and the natural order of life. There's nothing in nature that serves exclusively as a center of accumulation. Everything in nature in some way is a center of distribution. So, and David and I both, my partner, David Meltzer, for those of you that are listening here, we actually function as centers of distribution in our businesses and in our lives. I mean, we give away a ton of shit. We really do. My entire book of business is open in terms of what I have from an IP perspective. Now, there's some stuff that's behind a paywall, but I'm very clear about what that is, and probably 90% is given away in some way, shape, or form. So that kind of, I'll get off my soapbox here in a minute here. But the idea here has to do with, and this is what I heard embedded in what you were talking about, was the nature of the soul in a business environment is being able to access that thing that brings life and creativity into what it is that the business is doing, whether the entity itself or the people in the business. Can you speak to what you saw happen with your clients when you started positioning what your services are in a way that was different from Merrill, as an example? And I don't want to pick on Merrill, but what was the difference you saw in the way they responded?
Well, to be fair, I didn't have any experience with another, broker to know the difference, but I can tell you what did happen is here I am, a 20-something-year-old kid, and my agency is my name, J. Donovan Financial, and I'm able to take clients from, on that particular case, it was a Merrill advisor. She had been in the business for 20 years. She had like 200 plus million assets under management. So like technically I have no business beating a person like that. Right. Okay. But because I wasn't focused on just, hey, I have these suites of products I need to push, I went in there, fixed his estate issues, fixed his life insurance that was set to collapse and he would have lost and not been able to regain at his age. He went from putting only $19K in a 401k and I combined a defined benefit, defined contribution plan. So now he's putting away $270K a year tax deferred. Right. So like just opening up my mind and not saying, these are the things I need to push on this person. Instead, I learned about everything. I'm not an attorney, but I learned about eyelids and revocable trusts. Right. Yeah. So instead, it was all focused on end user. Right. And then also I looked at compensation as a strategy for what do I know they're not getting that they need. Right. Mm-hmm. And then from that, I can design something where I can serve the client in such a better way that they're willing to sign on with me. I'm still getting compensated and I feel really good because I'm not making short-sighted recommendations for them that leave a lot to be desired.
Right. That's interesting. Now, that leads me to ask this question here. You started off, with an agency under your own name, and mm-hmm. now you are Ethos Benefits.
Yeah.
So a couple of questions here. I love questions around why the name, first of all, but also what was the jump between, the personal brand and
Mhm.
now this organization that you call Ethos Benefits.
Yeah, so it was a little bit going through my path still in business, right? So now I got to a place where I'm making great consulting sales. I'm making a ton of money. And I was making enough money to not realize that it wasn't very satisfying work, because while I was making a huge difference in people's personal financials, like, you don't really get a pat on the back for that. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? And the other thing was, because I was working with business owners exclusively because of some of the tax planning I could do with them, they would work in their business all day and then call me all night and on the weekends. And that got old real fast.
Yeah.
So what I wanted was still to work with that business owner. I wanted to have those complex um, enterprise type sales. I wanted to make a difference in a way that was more appreciated, and I wanted to be able to hire more employees, because in a financial advisor, they really want to talk to me. They don't want to talk to anybody else. And
Hmm.
I wanted to create it into a more 9 to 5 business.
Okay,
And what happened accidentally was a client asked me to work on their healthcare plan. And he just called me and said, Donovan, I got a 40% increase. My broker says this is it. My healthcare is going to cost 40% more for my employees. Can you do anything? And I didn't know anything. I'd never done that type of sale before. It felt kind of like going backwards, going back
hmm
to where I started.
Medicare. Yeah.
So I was like, not that excited about it. But I said, I could hear the desperation in his voice. So it's like, yeah, send me everything you have. And I carefully worded that because I had no idea what I needed to get this done. Right. I was like, yeah, I'll take a look at it. Just send me everything you have. And I took everything he had, took 2 to 3 weeks, made a bunch of contacts in my industry, learned a bunch from other people. And I was able to structure a healthcare plan for his company, mitigating that 40% increase entirely. So when I did that and I got that proposal back, I had very different feelings, because I was looking at the calculation of what it was going to cost the 65 employees that were insured on that plan per paycheck per month. I'm looking at the family cost of healthcare and how much more of an increase that would have been. So back then we were talking, that difference was like 150 to $350 if you had a family on there.
Mhm.
So I'm looking at that and I'm looking at their salaries, and now I feel something, right? So now I'm like, all right, I'm on to
Sure.
something here. Like,
Yeah.
if their broker, who is publicly traded, said, this is it, you have to pay this, and I don't know anything, nor do I really want to, but I can figure that out. Not only is there a need, it's rewarding. I'm still working with the same ICP, but in a better way. And I get to actually impact American families. I was like, this is it, right? Like, lights came on, transition. So that's kind of what started the change from J. Donovan Financial to Ethos Benefits, is just seeing that we could have a larger impact.
Uh-huh. And how did the name Ethos come into play?
So, what's really cool is, like, with what we do, we get to get a peek of the inside of how different companies work across the country.
Hmm.
And the ones we like, our ideal client, have like a very strong ethos. So, ethos is the guiding character, principle, or spirit of an individual or an organization. And some companies have it. They have a strong why, they have a strong leadership, they have a strong purpose and culture, and some just don't, right?
Yep.
And we want to work with the ones that have a strong ethos for their employees and for everybody that works there, right? They have a spirit, they have a guiding principle or character.
Yeah.
Those are the people we want to serve. That's where we want to make our change. Um, so that was the reasoning behind ethos.
I'm glad you answered it that way, because that was the reason I wanted to have you on the show. Uh, quite frankly, for me, ethos is an expression of soul.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, it's a competitive advantage when people can tap into that. Like attracts like, number one. So I end up
Yeah.
working with people and organizations that have that soul, piece locked in. And it also is a competitive advantage that if we can leverage that particularly well, as Ethos is doing, nobody else can really replicate that. It becomes part of the cultural stew that informs everything and anything that you're up to.
Yeah.
Um, Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks. Part of what you've done, and I mentioned this in the introduction here a little bit, is a revolutionary approach that I'm going to read this from my notes here. Revolutionary approach that effectively eliminates fraud, waste, and abuse from healthcare plans while increasing savings. That's the addendum there. But what's the fraud, waste, and abuse that you typically find in most healthcare plans for employee healthcare plans specifically?
Yeah, we certainly don't have enough time left to go through it. But I'll explain to you the starting point because it's exactly the same as like my story, right? And it's that brokers in employer-sponsored healthcare get paid on a risk transfer, right? So they get paid to sell broker insurance plans, and that's their focus. And that doesn't do anything to fix the underlying problem, but that's where their comp comes from. So like, show me the incentives and I'll show you the results, right? Charlie Munger.
Yep.
That's kind of what leads the industry astray. So my concept coming in was that nobody was focusing on what's important, and that's reducing the frequency and severity of claims. Now, when people hear that, what employers hear is reducing the frequency and severity of medical conditions, right? Here's the difference.
Yeah.
A claim, like the definition of an insurance claim, is a request for dollars for a covered incident. And that's what we can affect. The request for dollars. How many? $1 sign, $4 signs, $5 signs, right? Like how many? And benchmarking and measuring that, not the conditions. We can't change what's going on with employees. We're not here to tell them what to do. We're not here to make things more difficult, like completely the opposite. What is true in healthcare that has kind of been hidden from employers is that request for dollars is wildly variable. If I were to send 5 people into any hospital in the country, but give them 5 different insurance cards, everyone would leave with a different bill.
Yep.
Same thing if I sent 5 people to the pharmacy and said, hey, go pick up this same medication. Everybody would leave with a different bill. So the question is like, whose job is it to monitor and measure that? Because you can say it's the insurance companies, but at some point, we have to kind of look at this and say, well, they've utterly failed at that the past 20 years because the cost of healthcare has just exploded to a level that is now unsustainable. So, the purpose of there's a really great saying, is an old British theorist, Madison Beer, and it's the purpose of a system is what it does. So therefore, we cannot say the purpose of a system is something that it repeatedly fails to do. So we can't say the purpose of health insurance is to keep the cost of healthcare low because it's utterly failed to do that over the past 20 years. So that's the short version.
I love that.
The abbreviated version of the healthcare problem.
Yeah. No, the frequency, that's the way you parse that, because and I've had the brokers try to sell me plans, particularly when we had offices all over the world, and it was always around embedded in it was making sure that you do something with your employees so that they do healthy things.
Yeah,
and it's kind of like I'm not in the business of changing people's behavior.
No.
No. Their mindset, which generates something else. But this is a different take on it, and I love the way you position that.
Yeah, I mean, this industry is really good at providing misdirection. Brokers have been trained on it, and some of them know better, and some of them don't. And some of them don't understand their solutions because, in their agency, they're still left with that portfolio, and this is the portfolio of things we're going to push on our clients. And some of them know there's a better way to do it. And when you get a peak into the back end of what's actually happening, like if you don't change your behaviors from that point, there's something wrong with you. Like
Yeah.
the stuff I see is just so absurd. You would not believe it. And one of the other like motivating factors for me to switch is like when I was a financial advisor, a lot of what I was doing was also trying to mitigate risk with lawsuits and litigation on
Mm.
401ks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And seeing that first healthcare plan, I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like these are employee dollars and employer dollars. Like people are looking in the wrong place because healthcare and 401k, both employee and employer dollars, right?
Yep.
I saw that first healthcare plan. I was like, everybody is looking in the wrong place. Like the waste is over here in healthcare plans. And finally, we're starting to see that. So last year, Johnson & Johnson sued, Wells Fargo sued. Yesterday, JP Morgan Chase sued, all for their healthcare plan and how they are making those decisions for employees. And if you read up on some of that on my LinkedIn, I try to post and keep it simple and explain it. That gives you like a brief peek into the insane decisions we make in healthcare that up until now have mostly gone unchecked.
You've got a documentary out that
Yes.
it's not personal; it's just healthcare.
Yeah.
In the time that we've got left here, do you want to, just talk about that a little bit? Because you raised this in the interview that we did on the Office Hours show.
Mm-hmm.
So just a little bit here, so that I can pique the interest of the listener here, because I want them to go
Yeah.
watch this.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend it for anybody. I mean, honestly, it's a much more engaging documentary than almost any of the other ones you'll see on Netflix or Prime, but we are working on getting it to streaming platforms. But right now, everybody can watch it on our website, ethosbenefits.com, and then there's a documentary tab up top. But the documentary is geared around employer-sponsored healthcare, all this fraud, waste, abuse, things that go on. And it's not going to be me talking. You'll just see me for like 90 seconds. It is clinicians and hospitals and practice owners and attorneys and administrators of state run healthcare plans, like explaining kind of the nonsense that they see, how those decisions get made, how it affects people, but also a framework for fixing it because it's not overly complex. It really isn't.
Yeah, you just got to look in the right place.
Yeah.
So, ethosbenefits.com is the website. Is there, and you've got a LinkedIn profile. Obviously, I've looked at it. It's pretty robust. So, any place else that people can get in touch with you? And I'm assuming that you do business outside of the state of Florida.
Yes.
And I ask that because regulations, particularly insurance regulations and whatnot, are a labyrinth of
Yeah. No, we
complexity.
do business in all 50 states,
Okay.
even Alaska and Hawaii. So yeah, we work anywhere in the country. Every state has minor differences in laws, but
Yeah.
and just differences in how we structure things. But there is opportunity in all healthcare plans. So yeah, LinkedIn is the best way. Shoot me a message. I'll respond to you.
Okay. And folks, I'll have all this in the show notes. Donovan, it's been a pleasure. I'm glad that you said yes to a longer form interview here.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'd like to have you back on at some point in time here. Yeah, as particularly given the political situation and what's going on in the economy today.
Yeah.
I think your take on some stuff down the road here after the dust has settled a little bit, or maybe the dust has collected a little bit deeper. I'm not sure
Yeah.
what it's going to do. I think your perspective would be very, very welcome.
Problem's not going away, and
No.
we're going to continue to see more lawsuits to employers. And shockingly, as I've had this conversation, I've actually had a lot of just employees watch the documentary, kick it to their executive teams, and I've had the executive teams engage with me. So even if you're not the decision maker at your company, I implore you, watch it, send it to them. I have engaged with so many companies and been able to help thousands of employees, tens of thousands, just from a regular employee kind of watching it and kicking it up. So yeah, also Blaine working on a RX prescription documentary exclusively about pharmacy benefit managers.
Oh,
so that'll be ready towards the end of next year, but that's something else that's coming.
That one's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, folks. Donovan Ryckis, CEO and co-founder of with his wife Chelsea. I want to be sure I get her in there.
Yes.
Ethos Benefits, ethosbenefits.com. And as you're listening here, and as I get close to signing off, I want to just remind you something I do every time. find a way in your life to be a center of distribution. There's a lot of things that you can give away. Nature works through distribution. It doesn't work through accumulation. And if we want a healthy environment, if we want a healthy lifestyle, if you want to be healthy, be a center of distribution. And until next time, take care, and we'll see you on the next episode.